This interview is for information only and should not be considered as investment advice or a recommendation to buy shares in the company featured. Welcome to this Stock Box interview. Joining us again today on our Geo podcast is, of course, Charlie, the geologist from SI Capital. Charlie, thank you very much for joining us again. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you, Mark. You doing well yourself?
Yes, doing very well. Thank you, Charlie. So today we're going to talk about Panther Metals, who I know you know a lot about. And of course, they announced recently that they had found the VMS they theorized was there at Obonga. And this was their objective to find that. I think before we get into the significance of this, could you briefly explain, in as layman's terms as you can, what a VMS system is?
Yeah, certainly. So VMS, volcanic massive sulfide, is, I'm sure everyone has watched a bit of David Attenborough deep at the bottom of the Earth's oceans and seen these kind of black smoker styles of kind of chimneys and these bits of smoke coming off and these fantastic looking creatures on it. Well, that's is a VMS. It's a volcanic massive sulfide. It's an area of the ocean seafloor which is being pulled apart, and as a result, the mantle is being brought close to the surface. And as that crust is being pulled apart, it creates fractures, and those fractures allow water to come down. They mix with or come close to the metals from the mantle, which are dissolved and then brought to the surface. And as they hit that barrier of exceptionally cold water, and they dump the sulfides or dump the metals in usually in the form of sulfides at the surface of that sea floor. And as a result, you end up with usually a kind of, to put it in the most basic of terms, it looks a bit like a spot. You've got a root that comes up and creates a mushroomy head to it. And within that, as the temperatures decrease, you end up seeing different metals forming at different stages, forming a zonation pattern. And that's the basic understanding of what you should get.
Okay. So why were Panther Metals looking specifically for a VMS? What does it tell them and why is it significant? So
volcanic massive sulfides, they're significant. They became significant kind of during the World Wars when metals were, in particular copper, weren't able to be transported around the world, and places like Canada really started focusing in on what they can mine in their own backyard. Now, volcanic massive sulfides, unlike porphyries, which are exceptionally large deposits that usually hold a huge amount of metals but are very low grade, these are the inverse. These are very small deposits, in fact, little pockets of metals within a whole system, in fact, and those little pockets are exceptionally high grade metals. So this is copper, this is gold, lead, zinc, a number of other metals, but predominantly those are the ones that are being focused in on.
Okay. Now, as I understand, this VMS discovery has been achieved with the aid of HIMAG and a few diamond drill holes. Can you explain this process, and also, is it easy to find one or not?
So to find one, I guess you're coming down to what we're talking about here. Yeah, so we're in a greenstone belt that we know have the indications of a volcanic massive sulfide forming system. BHP in the past did some drilling and they have intercepted broad zones of pyrite. So that indicates, well, actually, this system has got mineralization going. Now, volcanic massive sulfides don't just form in one occurrences, they generally form in clusters or camps along a stretch of this rift. And so being that historically we've seen these sulfide occurrences, and now Panther have again found these large zones of sulfide occurrences, that means that we've got a system that was prolonged and episodic. So being that we intercepted sulfides twice, that's another indication that, in fact, this sulfide event wasn't a single one-off kind of spew. It was a consistent spew. It indicates that you've got a lot of energy going on, a lot of water is being transported, and that all leads to the possibilities or the probabilities of metal-rich fluids also coming to the surface in economic concentrations. So what Panther are doing at the moment with the surveys, the MAG surveys, is they're identifying areas of magnetic interest. From the drilling, we can identify a number of interesting minerals there, in particular pyrrhotite, which is actually partially magnetic. And being that that's there, we can start using that magnetic data to start modeling out these clusters of VMSs along the deposit. Once we understand one deposit, understand how the structure of it formed, where the mineralization sits within it, we can take that model and start applying it to other VMS targets along that rift. So again, going back to Panther's RNS, we can see they talk about rare earths. Now, we're not saying in any way that these are commercially viable rare earth deposits, but rare earths are fantastic when you use them in ratio to each other. One end of the rare earth spectrum are compatible and the other end are incompatible. Now, that means which elements want to go into a mineral structure and which ones don't. And as a result, as these fluids move away, or that they move away from the hot zone and minerals start forming and falling out of solution, you'll have a change in ratio as you move from the close point, which will have very high compatible and very low incompatible ratios. So as you go further out, the compatible element decreases and the incompatible element increases, changing that ratio. Now, that's an important ratio that they mentioned because it starts to give us an arrow in which direction to start looking as to the main fault zone, where we will find the heat increase of the system. And from that heat increase, you'll hopefully be finding the metals of economic interest.
Okay. So with the aid of that arrow, as you say, perhaps leading you towards a discovery, can they also use the high mag model again to identify further drill targets?
Well, that's exactly the point, yes. So let's say we understand one target with this magnetic and magnetics, with the geochemistry, it starts pointing in other directions of, okay, what looks similar to this? And should we go and test it? It's something that's quite interesting. I mean, looking at stuff like mineral systems frameworks, where you're trying to understand how that mineral deposit works, how it formed, and from that you can start applying that to your other target. You can then start doing target ranking and the like, because, like I said, these are very small targets. So though there'll be a big footprint of indications, all these sulfides we know have been extensively spewed across this ancient sea floor, there's actually only going to be a relatively small pocket of it that's going to be high grade and the stuff that we're going to be interested in. So it's going to take a bit of work, but but what happens is just systematic surveys, drilling. You'll end up finding these high grade pockets, and from that you create a model. And this exploration model is what you can use to be deployed on these other targets. And so I was actually talking to someone the other day about this. It's a bit like you've got many locks, being the VMSs, and as soon as you've got that exploration model, that's one key, and that key can go into all those locks and start unlocking many doors for us. And VMSs are known in Canada. There's operations which are hub and spoke models, where multiple small but high grade deposits are found, and they can all be mined and shipped to one plant, and it becomes a very commercial operation of purely high grade material, which can be trucked further than low grade material. Because remember, if you're putting high grade material in a truck, that dollar per ton of metal being moved is exceptionally low. So it is good to be it can be transported at a very commercial rate. And that's what, again, this is what these things are exciting, is if you can hit those high grade zones, people want to know about it and people want to have it.
Okay. Now, about 80 kilometres west of Obonga, there is a greenstone belt that has 5 commercially producing VMS mines. Do you think there could be a connection between the belts that Panther might be looking to try and join the dots with?
A physical connection? Probably not. But you can use something called endowment analysis, where you can look at analogous systems and say, okay, what was discovered there? How were they discovered and when were they discovered? And you can say, well, how much exploration work has been done on my area that looks very similar to that? And what we can see is there's a disconnect. We're talking about multiple commercial ore bodies having been discovered in an area that's had a lot of exploration work done on it. Now, when we come over to Panther's ground, suddenly we can see there's a lot less work that's been done on it, yet it has a similar looking trend system in place. So just through using kind of simple endowment analysis, we could indicate, yes, there is a good potential, and we are talking about potential here, for this to be a very prospective area to be hunting around in.
So what would you say then would be the next stages now for Panther after this discovery?
Well, I guess it really comes down to talking. I personally want to be talking to the field geologists, because they'd be the ones that really tell you what they think of the core that's come out of the ground. It's going to indicate, looking at from the core logging, indications of how far on the peripheries you might be from that major system. You also might want to be looking at further geochemical analysis of that core. They do mention that there are some base metals within that. Again, you can look at lead-zinc ratios or other ratios within this core that can help us say where exactly we are in our system, and that will help them kind of start to unlock what's going on at Obonga. In regards to how the team can progress, I think truly the only way to develop this will be to do further drilling. Sadly, because of the pyrite being spewed all across this area, it's got very similar geophysical characteristic to that of chalcopyrite. And as a result, it's actually very difficult to refine it any further using geophysical methods. But further drill work will certainly help the team. Further down work, if we're able to identify similarities between the pyrrhotite and the mineralization, that would be useful. So a bit of academic work, I think that there'll be drilling to progress it.
Okay, and just a final thought, Charlie, and I know you're coming from a geologist point of view, not perhaps from Panther directly, but something I picked up from investors was that the results weren't like that great, let's say, but from what I understand is they weren't looking to hit significant mineralization, and it would have been fantastic if they did. This was really a point about finding the VMS, which they have done. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, precisely. It's understanding that we're talking about answering a question. If we were talking about resource infill drilling, and we hadn't come up with high-grade intercepts in this time, then yes, I'd be very concerned, because you should have a good understanding of your system, where the mineralization sits. But we're not trying to do that. What we're trying to do with this drilling is to identify where the mineralization still is. We need to come up with that exploration model to help us refine further drilling. And the only way to do that is by doing further drilling. My background actually was working on volcanic massive sulfides over in Cyprus. And one thing I do know is that they are exceptionally difficult to understand. They can be very large footprints, but you just need to be due diligence on the way you process the data. You're just going to be kind of just slowly working your way through, ticking off boxes, understanding your system in more detail. And like I said, as soon as you've unlocked one, you've got to realize as investors, well, there's a whole greenstone belt here that can be unlocked as well. And that's suddenly we're talking about exploration risk being reduced. And these first holes have significantly reduced exploration risk by improving the team's understanding of the system.
Okay. Well, Charlie, the geologist at SI Capital, thank you very much for your time today, just talking to us there about Panther Metals.
No, thanks, Mark. Really appreciate the time to be able to come on and have a little chat about it.
If you enjoyed this interview, then give us a thumbs up, a like or a retweet. Subscribe to us on YouTube or follow us on Twitter and hit that notification bell to be the first to know when we release new content. There's loads of great content on our website too, across all our programmes at stopboxmedia.com. Thank you for watching.